Savvy Business Radio, drawing out the best from our guests with our host, Christina Nichman.
Our guest today is Dr. Robert Genetski. He has a rare combination of business and academic experience. He is a world-renowned economist, financial advisor, teacher, author, and popular speaker. Today we discuss his enlightening book, Rich Nation, Poor Nation: Why Some Nations Prosper While Others Fail. Find out more and get his book today at ClassicalPrinciples.com. Hi, Robert. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio for our Heartbeat of the World segment. I'm so grateful to have you out here today. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. I can't wait to get started.
Oh, my gosh. Well, I'm so glad you're excited to get started because we're going to talk about something very important to everyone in the world. And it's funny. There's this guy I love. He's a business owner. He gives business training and sales. And he said, people often say to me, what's the most important thing in life and business? And people will say other things other than wealth and money. But honestly, in the Western society, everything we do in life requires money. From buying our food, our house, our clothing, everything requires making cash and income. So you've written a wonderful book called Rich Nation, Poor Nation, and you have extensive background in economics and how that plays a part in the economic wealth of countries. Share with our audience a little bit about your background. What brought you to creating your book?
Well, it was a long road. I have a Ph.D. in economics from New York University. I taught at New York University, and I taught at the University of Chicago's Graduate School of Business. I've also written 4 books prior to this one. And each of those books discuss the importance of economic freedom and exactly what causes prosperity and what causes people to create very difficult times in a country. And so this is basically my background. What was different this time, 2 things. First of all, I have my own consulting company, so I'm advising people all the time about what's going to happen to the economy, what's likely to happen to financial markets, is the stock market likely to still be a good place to invest, and what's going to happen to interest rates, things like that that are very important for having people get ahead in their lives so that they can enjoy prosperity. So what is different about my latest book, Rich Nation, Poor Nation, is I did what I had always wanted to do, but the data were never really completely available for doing so. And that was to look at history, look at the history of our country, look at the history of other countries, and to try and show with the data the extent to which policies have produced prosperity and other policies have produced very poor economic conditions. So this was kind of a lifelong effort or endeavor for me to try and answer some very critical questions that I thought could help me in my business and help others by understanding where the economy was likely to be headed under different policy assumptions.
Wow. And I think it's a good time to actually, because people have different understandings of what prosperity or even freedom mean.
Money is kind of neutral by itself. You know, we work to create more money, and the more money we have, then it's our decision as to whether we're going to use that money and wealth in a constructive way or a not so constructive or even a destructive way. So the money itself is neither good nor bad. It can be used for either. But the key is if you have it, then you have more options for helping people if you want, which would really be what I think we are all called to do.
Yeah, absolutely. How would you define economic freedom and prosperity?
Well, let me take economic freedom first, because I mentioned what I had done in this book was to take different policies and try and see the effect of them. And in terms of the different policies, I took policies that were moving people in the direction of giving them more freedom over their lives and more control over their lives as one policy agenda. And the opposite policy agenda was moving people away from economic freedom. Now, what do I mean by economic freedom? Well, by economic freedom, we mean giving people more control over their lives. What that entails is giving them lower tax rates so that they can control more of the basic money that they earn. It also means having government spending grow slower than spending in the private economy, in the overall economy, because it's a power struggle. If government is getting more power, then it means that as individuals have less power, because this is an entity that's controlling us to some extent. They're telling us what we can do and what we can do and what we cannot do. So, and when government ends up regulating more of our activities, telling us again what we can do and what we can't do, that's a move away from economic freedom. When government's cutting back on those regulations, we're getting more freedom. And it's the same with markets. If markets are free to operate, then they reflect the opinions that people have as to what's important to them. And if government comes in and all of a sudden decides that they're going to regulate markets, for example, by putting a minimum wage at which you can work, or just as one example, then government is taking away the freedom of that individual to make a decision as to what is in their best interest. So economic freedom is basically giving people more freedom and control over their lives, and that's usually associated with the government stepping back from controlling people's lives.
And so what I'm getting here is that really it empowers each individual to make their own choices and at the same time be responsible for their own destinies without kind of without giving that power to some government organization.
Right. The more power we give to government, the less power we as individuals have, and the more power over us government has. And there's been a constant battle throughout history. When the country was founded, our country was founded on a unique concept. The idea that we should give people the maximum amount of freedom and control over their lives as they could possibly have, so long as they didn't injure or hurt someone else. And that was a unique concept. No country had ever been founded on that idea. The ideas had been talked about, but no one had ever done it. And the founding fathers basically went back, took all of these ideas and decided that not only was that important, but that was also consistent with natural law or consistent with what God really intended. You know, God gave us all pretty much freedom and control over our lives. And he, for better or worse. And he knew that we wouldn't always do the right things, but he wanted us to make that decision for ourselves, and he was not going to control that. And that's what our founding fathers did. They said, you know, this comes directly from God, and we should not have some central authority telling us how to live, directing us in our efforts, and telling us what we can do and what we cannot do, so long as we're not injuring someone else. So this was our history, and in the 1913, we started to depart from that. We had what was called our first progressive movement.
Yes.
And by progressive, under Woodrow Wilson,
the Federal Reserve.
Meant the Federal Reserve, the income tax, increasing the role of government. I mean, President Wilson was the first progressive, and he was very proud of being a progressive because he felt that he and the people that he was going to hire knew better than individuals what was in their best interest. And that was our first period from 1913 to 1920. When I went through and I looked at the history of the United States, I came out with what I consider to be 52 years when our policies were moving clearly in that direction, in the direction of let's make the government supreme over the individual. And it was all for a good purpose. They felt they were so smart that the individual would prosper and would be much happier if their divine ideas of what was in their best interest would work. Now, what I found
Can I ask you something? Can I stop you?
Sure.
So with that 52-year period, was that kind of from 1913 all the way through the New Deal and onward? Where was that period? No. Yeah, there are strict criteria that I look at in my book, and those criteria took the first period from 1913 to 1920. In roughly around 1921. Conditions were so bad that the election of 1920 actually turned the political landscape upside down, and the progressives were just totally defeated in the House, in the Senate, and in the presidency. And what we entered then was a period of major cuts, not only in government spending. Government spending actually fell in half during the 1920s from where it was at the beginning of the decade.
And tax rates were also brought way, way down from where they were. And we ended up with the roaring 20s. We had a great period there. But beginning in 1929, we started to go in the opposite direction. And incidentally, it was under a Republican president, President Hoover, who really believed in the progressive economic movement. He wanted the government in there, taking more control over individuals. He, of course, pushed for that Smoot-Hawley tariff. He pushed for increases in government spending. And when the economy really started to plunge, he got kicked out of office, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, another progressive, came in. Now, I end that period in 1940 because, of course, when we start the 1940s, we're into World War II. And we have a totally different economic environment that I claim is not consistent of one or the other. We go back to the progressive period in the late 60s and 1970s. Some people in our audience may remember that period. A lot of government controls, higher taxes, regulation. We regulated the price of gasoline. We had gasoline lines going around the block, and people arguing, and a lot of dissension in the country, and much more, incidentally, than we have today.
Whoa.
But our most recent period of progressive economic policies I have beginning in 2004, again, under a Republican president. But all of a sudden, we're starting to increase government spending and regulation. And part of it was in response to 9/11. But still, the figures show government spending growing very rapidly and more regulations being put on the economy. And the end result is we have another poor period. And what I did is I ended up all of these periods, the periods when we were moving in the direction of economic freedom and those where we were moving away from economic freedom. And what I found was when we moved in the direction of economic freedom, middle class wages increased by a total of 167% in real terms in only 50 years since 1900.
Wow.
Now, when we were moving away in these progressive periods that I talked about, and frankly, this shocked me because I could not believe it when I went through the numbers over and over and over again because I really wanted to get it right. There was zero increase in middle class wages over the 52 years when we followed this progressive economic agenda, or so-called progressive agenda, where we got the government more involved, we raised taxes, we regulated markets, we regulated industry. So there's such a dramatic difference that I've really challenged people. You know, if you have people around you who believe that increasing government is a really wise move and it's really good for the middle class, increasing prosperity, please get a hold of my book. And I urge people who disagree with it to run the numbers for themselves, because the numbers are all public numbers. These are not numbers. I don't do highly sophisticated economic models that no one can understand, including the people who have done them.
Numbers don't lie.
These are All I do is I show what is happening to consumer spending in real terms during these periods, what's happening to middle class wages during these periods. And I in each chapter, I tell you exactly what was happening to economic policies, what was happening to tax rates, what was happening to government spending, and I show the charts. And again, this is all public data, so it's something that anyone could easily and I urge them to recreate, because we really want to know about these things. You don't want to go through another period where the middle class is suffering and people are at each other's throats because they're having a very difficult time making ends meet.
Yeah. And Bob, this is amazing to me. And it's interesting. Right after our recent election, there was a gal that called me up and was so distraught. And she was more distraught about economy because she said she works with a number of businesses. She's a consultant. And she said she's talked to her recent consultant clients, and they said they're really, really excited about the prospect of maybe possibly less restrictions and regulations on their business so they can actually make more profit and grow as a business. And of course, then give more, as we talked about earlier in the conversation. As the business grows, you can create more jobs, and there's more money you can give your employees. But she was like, all they care about is the bottom line. They're so greedy. And I thought to myself, well, you're a business owner. If we're not making money, no one is helped, including our employees. So how did we ever get to this point, Bob, where we're actually, some people are like actually thinking it's a bad idea that we make money and be prosperous and have less government? How do we ever get here?
Well, I think it's a lack of understanding about really the economic process, because again, people like to think that there are things that are more important than money. The point that you made at the beginning, and there are many things more important than money. However, when you go to other countries and see what the living standards are in those other countries and how poor those people are and how much they are struggling, you come to the conclusion that there's got to be something better. Mm-hmm. And even in this country, as wealthy as we are, and we have really by far the wealthiest of all the major countries in the world. I mean, it really doesn't get much better than the economic environment here in the U.S., even when the economic environment here in the U.S. we think is just awful. Mm-hmm. When you compare it with the rest of the world, there's just absolutely no comparison. Mm-hmm. And so I would urge people who don't think that that's important to go to some of these countries, see what's there. And the one thing I would also suggest mm-hmm. is that the people who are advocating redistributing income, because we have so much and they have so little. Yeah. We try to redistribute income in this country. We mm-hmm. recently added up all the money spent on our welfare programs, and it came to like $1 trillion a year. Whoa. Now that's roughly 5% of all of our income. And we still have poverty all over the place in one of the richest countries in the world. It's very, very difficult to help people by redistributing income. Mm-hmm. I think you have to redistribute income in any civilized society to take care of people who can't take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. That should be a given. Mm-hmm. But taking care of people who can take care of themselves, that doesn't always work out too well, because unfortunately, people will take advantage of a situation. And I know I've seen it, and many other people have seen it. People on food stamps buying things that people who have full-time jobs still can't afford to buy. And it's just a question of fairness.
It's interesting, Bob, because I spoke to someone not too long ago who had been out of work for 2 years. They were on unemployment, and the time for the unemployment was about to run out, and they were frantically begging everyone on their Facebook page, please help me find a job. I ran out of insurance in 2 weeks. I'm like, what were you doing for 2 years, my friend? So, I mean, there's an example right there. I mean, she's total able-bodied, but, I've heard people talking during those times where they're out of work. Well, this would be a great vacation, a great respite. I'll get to take good vacations with the family and hang out with the kids. And while I understand a little bit of respite to get your mind back in the game and to really get your body back in gear, 2 years, my friend. And it's sad. I think we've gotten to a point, Rob, where I've talked to someone who said, well, it's mine. I deserve it. And it's that kind of entitlement attitude that I think is kind of destructive to all of us in this country.
Well, and just to give you an idea of how bad it is, there was a study that was done several years ago where all of the welfare payments were added up that you were eligible for in different states. And it turned out that in 8 states in our country, you can make more on welfare than the median wage if you took advantage of all those programs. And no doubt there are some people who work very hard at not working. And there are also 35 other states where you could come within 80% of the median wage. The median means there's many people earning more as earning less. So you could almost make these poor people who are working and getting up maybe at 5, 6 in the morning and putting in a full week of work, you can almost make that because of the different sets of welfare programs that were out there. I think it was a shocking study, but it just shows you how difficult it is politically to argue against any sort of aid to someone whose income is below average. It's politically, it's very difficult because most people are compassionate. Most people want to help other people. The question is, do we do more help or do we do more harm to a family? We had a policeman recently that we met who went into a home to try and help with a dispute that was going on. And he said that there were 3 generations in that home, all on welfare. And it looked like that had become a way of life. And so there's obviously something wrong with the system where generation after generation after generation, you're in a similar situation where you're just relying on handouts to live.
Yeah. And it's funny. I've heard way back when that you could actually, as you were saying, make more staying home. Why bother going to work? And I thought that was ludicrous. Of course, that can't be true, but it's been proven it is true, which is scary. The very thought that, hey, if people find out that I don't have to go to work, then why bother? But I think there's something more to it because I found that when you're not earning it yourself, and this is something I learned back when I was getting an allowance. I would get a straight allowance for doing specific work that I would get paid for as a kid. And when I got that allowance, I didn't get a lot. So it would take me a long time to build up whatever I wanted to buy. And that, whatever that thing is I finally bought with my $1 a week or whatever, it meant so much to me because it took me a while to build up and to buy it myself without it being just.
Well, you earned it. You earned it. And there's a total different feeling when you get something because you earned it yourself or because someone gave it to you. Or at least there should be. And I think you were taught the right lesson. So you had a good role model there.
Yeah. Now I know your book is number 1 for people to get a head start if they're thinking otherwise, but how do we begin to transform the country for people who might not even know your book or now they read it? Where do they even begin to start changing where we are today as far as we're operating on a lot of welfare systems, a lot of debt, crazy, $20 trillion in debt. How do we ever get out of this?
Well, there are 2 things here. One, even let's say we can't get out of it. Let's say the policies simply go in the opposite direction. You really have an obligation to yourself and your family to know what's happening to policies and what the effect of those policies are going to be. Because obviously the people who put the policies in place are going to tell you this is all going to work out great. Well, it doesn't always work out great. So the first thing you ought to do, I believe, is read the book, find out which policies have a proven record of working in the past and which ones have a proven record of failing. And that will at least give you one leg up. Because if you know that the policies are being put into the place of the ones that are not going to cause the economy to be well, you have to start making plans to adjust for that. And let's take the better case. Let's say policies are moving in the right direction. Then what happens is if you've got a job and you're thinking, gee, maybe I should take a chance and leave this one for a better job. Hey, if the economy is if policies are all moving the economy in the right direction, then take the chance, go for it. If you've got a business, you might want to expand the business as a result of that. How about the stock market? You might feel more comfortable in investing in a stock market if policies are changing in a positive direction. So whether or not we can change policies is just very important for you and your family that you know what sort of policies have a proven record of success and which ones have a proven record of failure. And that will help you make decisions. Now, the other question, which is really what we really would like, we all want to change to the right set of policies. And I think we know now that the nation is about as divided as we've ever seen it, really. It's almost difficult to get into a discussion with someone about policies because people's emotions run so high. And we have about half the nation that wants to move in the direction of what I call economic freedom, and the other half that wants to move in the opposite direction. They want government to take more control, more control. So for good reasons. I don't question anyone's motive. But in this case, I believe reading the book and maybe getting a copy and just offering it to someone who has an opposing view so that you have a basis for talking and debating on it in a much more intelligent manner, I think would be a really help toward changing some people's opinion. And the people's opinions, I think, that are most important to change are the ones who are not terribly committed one way or the other.
Good
because those are the ones that swing back and forth, and really those are the ones that end up determining whether or not we move policies in the direction of freedom or away from freedom.
Wow. Those are tremendous points and very true, because as you stated, there's so many people having arguments about this or that, and sometimes about silly things that have nothing to do with our everyday lives and the moving forward of our country in a positive direction. And it's like, stop, people. People are outing their moms and their sisters and their wives, and it's like, enough already. We need to get on a reasonable platform where we can actually have a discussion with facts, not with emotion. And really come to hear each other. Because I've said that's what the beauty of this Heartbeat of the World segment came about last year, just before the election. This is a business show. And more folks were coming on in the business show and talking about, well, whatever candidate they like, their favorite team member. And I was like, wow, how did we ever get here? We're talking about this like this is our favorite basketball or football game. And then there were quite animosity at, oh, my team member is better than your team member. And I was like, okay, we need to look at this in a more constructive way. So we created the Heartbeat of the World, inviting wonderful experts like yourself to really bring to the table their own viewpoint and wisdom so we can have an intelligent conversation on these matters. And I really, really thank you, Robert, for coming today and sharing all this. Again, where can they go to get your book and find out more and get their copy today?
You can go to Amazon.com or you can go to Barnes & Noble. Both of them are carrying it online. The reviews so far have been very good. The acceptance of it has been good. And I think the main reason for that is, as you say, this is dealing with facts, and the facts are pretty straightforward, and they're pretty cold hard facts. And I think this should be the basis of trying to discuss policies, as opposed to the emotional outburst one way or the other. I mean, if you don't like the facts, go in. You can get this data that's in my book and redo it for yourself. And I urge people to do it, because I think if you do, you'll come out to the same conclusion I've come to, and that is economic freedom is really the best course for getting our country moving and to creating the sort of prosperity that most people would like to see.
Wow. And you said you have a consulting company that is ClassicalPrinciples.com, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Because I want them to get in touch with your wonderful consulting group as well. If they want to, everyone, please get Rich Nation, Poor Nation today on Amazon, all the wonderful sellers. I'm sure it's everywhere. And I thank you again, Bob, for coming to share your great wisdom today on Savvy Business Radio.
No, thank you, Christine. I appreciate it.
Savvy Business Radio broadcasts worldwide via a large podcast network, celebrating business owners, entrepreneurs, influencers, and successful individuals. Find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest. Call 732-474-7375 or email Christina@savvybusinessradio.com.